A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. May I say excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this afternoon's presentation. A very warm welcome to each of you, but a special welcome to our guest of honor, His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Yemen. I must start off by saying that Yemen is not new to us. In fact, if the distinguished members of the Yemenis community here are a great testament for the fact that our relationship is a very old relationship. But just now, as we were discussing outside, old is a very comparative term. And by old, for us, it means 200 years ago, the relationship. But in the case of Yemen, you are an old civilization. And it is a civilization that has seen so many changes. So for you, 200 years is yesterday. So for us, it is very old. The Romans and the Greeks, they knew Yemen. They were charmed by Yemen. And they had a special name for Yemen. They called it Arabia Felix. Felix, I suppose, meaning happy, bountiful, fortunate. But they got it right. It was a charming place where they knew. The charm is still there. But since then, Yemen has traveled many paths, has gone through many journeys, has come from then to now. And there were many stages in Yemen's history where you couldn't start. But maybe we can go back to 22nd May 1990 when the two countries got together, there was a merger, and you have today's Republic of Yemen. But one thing is still there. The importance of Yemen then in the spice trade, frankincense, myrrh, coffee. And today, there is a growing awareness of the importance of Yemen for the security of the region. And one person who has been going around explaining the strategic importance of Yemen is none other than our honorable guest speaker. His Excellency Abu Bakr Al-Kirbi he graduated in medicine. He is a doctor. He graduated in Edinburgh. Then he continued, did pathology in London, taught in Canada, then came back to Yemen, taught in the university there, was dean of the science faculty, then became dean of medicine, then became rector. Then he became minister of education, subsequent to that minister of expatriate affairs, and now minister of foreign affairs. His Excellency has, over a period of time, gone to various places to tell them about Yemen, what Yemen stands for, what Yemen's interests are, and what other people's interests ought to be in Yemen. We have put on your chairs, you would have noticed it, an interview His Excellency gave to the Yemen Times. We didn't have his permission to distribute this, but we thought it was a good indicator of the interest His Excellency has. I don't think you came to listen to me. May I have the great pleasure to say that we are very delighted to have the Foreign Minister here. We are very delighted that he could come. We are very delighted he agreed to speak to us. And when I look at the distinguished crowd, I must also recognize the Ambassador of Kuwait, our own Ambassador to Yemen, Ambassador Helmi, and I see Professor Farid Alatas, Professor Rohan there. So we have a very distinguished crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, my great pleasure to introduce you to our guest speaker.
Good afternoon. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let me first of all thank you for your kind remarks and giving a little bit of my background as a physician and as educationalist, and I suppose that's what I would like to be remembered as rather than a politician. And I'm delighted to be with you here in the Middle East Institute at the National University of Singapore to talk about Yemen and to exchange views and hopefully change some of the wrong perceptions about Yemen. I suppose with my medical background, I try to avoid doing a lot of diagnostics and try maybe to make some reasonable prescriptions which are affordable, because unfortunately there are a lot of prescriptions that are not affordable. And this is, I think, the difficulty we face in Yemen. We have a lot of countries and partners and donors who are interested in Yemen and the challenges faced for Yemen, and they make a lot of diagnoses and write lengthy prescriptions, and then they go away and come back a few years later and discover that we haven't made much progress. And the reason is that when they wrote their prescriptions, they did not realize whether the sick man can afford to buy the medicine or not. And it's not of lack of will really to improve things in Yemen, but because of the lack of resources. So this is one early diagnosis. Yemen, as I'm sure, especially in the Middle East Institute, you've been following the developments in Yemen over the last, in recent history, over the last 20 years since the unification of the North and the South. And the unity which was supposed to lead to a better conditions in Yemen, because it would have eliminated one of the reasons for the conflict in Yemen between the North and the South, because as you probably remember, the North was, I wouldn't say it's capitalistic thinking, but it is considered to be pro-Western, and the South was a socialist state, pro-Eastern Bloc at that time. And there has been wars between them for no good reason, except that there was an intention of one side or the other to impose its political agenda on the other. The demise of the Eastern Bloc has helped to resolve this conflict through the unification. And everybody was optimistic that after the unification of Yemen, Yemen will prosper because there will be pooling of resources, lack of conflict. We will be able to deal as a bigger country with our neighbors. We will open the doors for investment. We will be able to explore the potential of Yemen in many areas. But then, unfortunately, months after the unification, there was the occupation of Kuwait by Iraq. And this had rather a significant impact on Yemen, coupled with another significant problem, which I'll mention later on. The occupation of Iraq and of Kuwait by Iraq and Yemen's position, which was unfortunately was not considered in really in the right analysis as to what was Yemen's position, but simply because we were against the war against Iraq at that time, people thought that Yemen was in favor of occupation of Kuwait, which was not the case. Because if one looks at the number of resolutions passed at the Security Council at that time, Yemen voted with every single resolution against Iraq except for the one which declared the war against Iraq. And Yemen had reservation because we thought that the Arabs could have resolved the occupation by persuading Saddam Hussein at that time to evacuate Iraq. And unfortunately, this, as I said, this position has resulted in rather imposing a lot of sanctions, economic sanctions on Yemen by the GCC countries, by some Western countries, not all of them, but some, by the United States at the time. And this meant that the newly united Yemen was unable really to get the resources it needed really to regenerate additional revenues for its programs of reforms and economic development. This was compounded with the other reason that I alluded to before, that after the unification, we went into the first parliamentary elections in Yemen, because the unification of Yemen has with it introduced the multi-party system, democratic processes, and therefore we were embarking on a new era of democratic rule, which again, I regret to say maybe it was a little too ambitious by us as Yemenis, and we did not prepare the ground for democracy to really be established on an educational, cultural, social basis. The results of the elections were a disappointment to one of the partners of the unification, the Socialist Party from the South, because after unification, there was a division really of government posts between the North and the South. And this created rather tremendous difficulties. The ministries were divided on equal basis between the North and the South. If there is a minister from the North, his vice minister will be from the South. The deputy ministers will also be equally divided between the North and the South. And therefore, when the political difficulties started to emerge after the unification, every side of the government sided with its political party. In other words, we were not really dealing with the issue on a national basis, but on a party basis. And this has paralyzed the country. And as a result of this paralysis, there were a lot of internal political problems. The elections came, the Socialist Party was badly defeated, and they were very surprised to be defeated because they thought they had a very strong public support in the northern part of the Yemen, which did not materialize. To cut the story short, it eventually led to the 1994 war for separation, and which was defeated, cost Yemen at that time tremendous amount of resources, and rather really multiplied the economic ills of the country. And this continued basically throughout the 90s until the year 2000, although relations started to improve during that period with the GCC countries. But really the landmark for improvement was the signing of the border agreement with Saudi Arabia in 2010. And then things started to roll in favor of better relations between Yemen, Saudi Arabia, the GCC countries, and they started to open the door for development aid, very little, until 2006, when there was a donors conference in London, and GCC countries with the Europeans, World Bank, IMF, came in, and there were pledges for about $5.2 billion to support economic development in Yemen, in addition to various infrastructure investment. And we expected that as a result of that, the economic ills will start to diminish. Unfortunately, it didn't, because the donors unfortunately have pledged this huge amount of money, but 4 years later the amount of the $5 billion that has been dispensed was no more than about 12%. So we have on paper about over $4 billion now for development in the country. And as a result of this, we've had two other problems, or three actually. One is the economic, the second one is Al-Qaeda, and the third is the political problems both in Sa'da, in northern Yemen, and in the south, which really diverted the government's attention from dealing with the economic issues to having to deal with the political issues. In 2010, as you remember, there was also the attack on USS Cole in Aden. And that wasn't really the first signal of terrorism in Yemen, because there was actually a previous attempt by Al-Qaeda in 1995, when the Americans wanted to mobilize their forces in Somalia, and they wanted to use Aden as a base. And Al-Qaeda tried to actually attack one of the hotels where the Americans were staying. And this was the first signal, really, of Al-Qaeda presence in Yemen. This, unfortunately, happened at a time when Al-Qaeda was not really in the picture, but there were obviously terrorist groups acting in the region. And when we alerted, actually, our partners, if I may put them in that perspective, about terrorism, how it's important to deal with terrorism, nobody took care or paid attention to that. And then it was repeated in Nairobi and in Dar es Salaam. And there were evidence of links also with Al-Qaeda groups in Yemen. And yet nobody really paid much attention to our calls for the need for greater international cooperation. And then came 2000, and then came 2001, 11th of September. And this is what alerted, really, I think, the Americans in particular, to the danger of the presence of Al-Qaeda in Yemen. Unfortunately, this alert came first a little too late, and secondly, did not really provide a rather more logical approach to dealing with Al-Qaeda. And I think, in a way, if again I venture into saying this, is that our approach to dealing with terrorism until today has not really proved successful. Not only in Yemen, I am talking generally worldwide. Why is that? One, I think, because in dealing with the terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda or others, every country tended to look at that from its own security, rather from the global security. The Americans were interested to see how they can safeguard the U.S. mainland and the U.S. citizens, and they wouldn't care what happens to the others. The same with Europe. And therefore, countries like Yemen and others in the region were very frustrated, because we cannot really put our concerns about Al-Qaeda and make them understand that Yemen, with its very limited capabilities and resources, cannot really undertake the challenge of fighting terrorism on its own. And there are a number of reasons for that. If you follow up on what happens in Yemen now, you will know that Yemen now is targeted by Al-Qaeda in Somalia, not Somaliland, in Somalia. We have in Yemen about 700 to 800,000 Somali refugees from the Horn of Africa. This imposes on us now tremendous pressure to safeguard our coastline as a result of this continuous migration, hundreds on daily basis. We have also to look after our land borders with Saudi Arabia and Oman, because many of these refugees who come to Yemen, Yemen is not an attractive place for them. I mean, it's true that there is probably there is no war in Yemen, and it is a safe haven as far as the impact of wars are, but economically it's not attractive. And therefore they will all just find ways of trying to use it as a hub to the GCC countries or to Europe. And we've been challenged by our neighbors that we are not paying enough attention to our borders. So we have to increase the surveillance of our borders in order to prevent the movement of these refugees from Yemen to the GCC countries. Additional cost to our security. And apart from, of course, the economic cost of having 800 to 700 refugees in a country where about 30% of its population are facing unemployment. And now, Yemen has become is getting a lot of attention now for the wrong reasons, actually, and that is the reason of terrorism, and this is rather magnified, to tell you the truth. There are Al-Qaeda, of course, in Yemen. How many are they? I think they are in the hundreds, no more than that. Unfortunately, because of Yemen's terrain, Yemen is about half a million square kilometers. Parts of it is extremely difficult mountainous terrain. So the challenge of facing Al-Qaeda, who are basically fighting guerrilla warfare, who are targeting soft targets like cars of ambassadors or tourists moving it from one part of the country to the other. They are no real cause for concern as far as Yemen's security is concerned. But their impact is great on the economy of Yemen, because they have hampered investment into Yemen. Tourism has almost gone to zero, from a few hundred thousand every year, almost nil now because of the terrorist attacks. There are also, unfortunately, efforts by Al-Qaeda to disrupt the internal politics of the country. And this is where the attention has come to Yemen. Although I think Al-Qaeda, the conflict in Sada, the conflict in the south, its causes are basically economic ones. I'm sure you will be amazed if I tell you that the GNDP of Yemen doesn't exceed $25 billion. If I tell you that the Yemen population is 25 million people, 24 plus, that this population of 24 million are scattered over 150,000 settlements. Means villages, small towns, group of people living in various remote areas. I mean, Egypt, which has a population of 3.5 times Yemen, has only about a third of the settlements we have in Yemen. So you can imagine the challenges of development, of providing services, of building schools, health centers, roads, electricity, and so on. Now, can Yemen get out of these difficulties? Sure, I think it can. Why am I confident that it can? There are, I think, a number of reasons. One, as I think the statement in his introduction, I think people realize now that Yemen is extremely an important country for not only regional but world stability. You've all, I think, followed the impact of piracy in the Gulf of Aden and the Arab Sea and the Indian Ocean. And therefore, if for any reason Yemen is destabilized, as the case in Somalia, and then this sea route going through the Gulf of Aden will be extremely in danger of piracy and terrorism. And therefore, people realize that the stability of Yemen is extremely essential for international trade, for regional stability. The second is Yemen, in spite of its poverty, has demonstrated a positive impact on the region. We have played a role in negotiating settlements in Somalia between the Somalis. We have also been intervening between Eritrea and Ethiopia, between Eritrea and Djibouti. And because of our good relations with these countries, we are using these relationships in order to stabilize our region and to stress that conflicts should be resolved through peaceful negotiations and not through war. So people look at Yemen as a player really in the stability of the region. The third reason, I think, is Yemen's proximity to the GCC countries. And the GCC countries, maybe for a long time, did not pay enough attention to Yemen's needs. But at the moment, I think things are moving in the right direction. GCC countries are now the major contributor to the development of Yemen. Between them, they contribute about 65 to 70% of donors' aid and grants to Yemen. They are now accepting Yemen more and more into a number of GCC ministerial committees and GCC organizations and institutions. They are working with Yemen on integrating the Yemeni economy with the GCC countries' economy. The membership of Yemen in the GCC countries is a different story. There are obstacles to that. Basically, some of them are political and some of them are security obstacles. But we feel that the economic integration of Yemen within the GCC in the long term will lead to Yemen's full membership in the GCC countries. And we are not considering that the full membership at this stage is a priority, more than really developing stronger relations, luring the GCC countries to invest in Yemen and to help in the development programs in Yemen. The fourth reason why Yemen is getting more, I think, support and therefore will come out of its ills is that the Europeans and the Americans are now very much interested in a very ambitious national agenda for reforms in the country. And this is a very comprehensive agenda of reform. Those of you who might have followed the London meeting on the 27th of January of this year in London would have heard Hillary Clinton praising Yemen for the document it has presented to the meeting, in which we have outlined very clearly and very transparently the challenges faced by Yemen, the defects in our political, social, economic system, and our proposal to deal with these through the national reform agenda. It's a very ambitious national agenda, and that is why, because it is going to take years to implement it, we have taken out of it 10 priority areas which relate to security, the judiciary system, the economic reforms, the administrative reforms, so that they will be the basis really for the support we are hoping to get from our partners in development to initiate the process of change, which will hopefully stabilize the economy before it starts to improve subsequently. And finally, the fifth, I think, reason that is giving hope about improving situation in Yemen is the commitment of the government and the dialogue that is now running through a very difficult times between Yemenis on how Yemen can get out of and face these challenges. Because I think, and I'm sure you will agree, that unless there is a will amongst the Yemenis, and the Yemenis take the leadership to correct the ills in our political, economic, social system, nobody can come from outside and rectify it for us. We have to do it ourselves. But we need the support. We need the support of our partners, and there is now a group of friends of Yemen composed of 22 countries and international organizations. We've had a number of meetings, and the next meeting will be in Riyadh, hopefully the end of next month or early July, in which we will really draw the roadmap for the recovery of Yemen's economy, and also for the political reconciliation within the country. What do we expect from Singapore? I think I've given you probably a number of reasons why it is important for Singapore also to look at Yemen's needs. We know that Singapore shies away from international politics, but I don't think it can shy away from international economics and trade. And this is why we would like to see Singapore really to explore the possibilities of and potentials of investment in Yemen, and there are many, I think. Singapore has a remarkable history in management of ports, in trade, in industry, and Yemen now is establishing a number of free zones, industrial areas. All we want is really to see some businessmen from Singapore to come and explore these possibilities. The other area, of course, is the technical assistance. I think Singapore is exemplary as far as governance is concerned. It has some excellent training programs, and training is one of the areas that are badly needed in Yemen. I'll leave it at that, and I'll be glad to answer any question. Thank you for your listening.
Excellency Minister, thank you very much. We open the floor now to questions, comments, discussions. Please identify yourself, give your name and your organization, and we have time, so still keep your questions short. Thank you very much. Could we have the first question?
Yes, Excellency, thank you very much for your presentation. I have two questions. The first question is about the discrepancy between the North and the South. In the minds of many people, I think that the popular conception is that the North and the South are two very different societies. people often say that the South, people are more educated, their attitudes are more modern, it's a more class-based society. The North is more tribal-based. So there are people often cite these cultural and social differences. So I want to ask you, to what extent is this true? And if so, how does it hinder the true unification of the North and South? And how have these differences, are these differences still as great today as they were 20 years ago upon unification? That's one question. The other question with regard to what Yemenis outside, including the diaspora, what are they doing with regard to development in Yemen, particularly with regard to reconstruction, investment in other areas? What are they doing, and what more can we do? You mentioned something about what more can do. But my question is more directed towards the Yemenis, Afghans, and others who are second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation originally from Yemen. What would you like us to do? You mentioned about trade, about investment, but apart from that, I mean, we are not only traders, we are also educationists, academics, and other areas. So what are the possibilities for us to contribute to development of Yemen? Thank you.
Two important questions. In response to your first question, I think in any country, I think even when you look at country, very well developed country like the United States, there are still discrepancies between various states, between communities within the same state. So I think the discrepancies is something that is impossible to avoid, unfortunately. There is always the rich and the poor, the socially discriminated, and so on. The issue about the tribal system, I think there was unfortunately a wrong impression about the South losing its tribal system. Because if you remember the conflicts which took place in 1986 in the South during the YSP rule, and it was a conflict within the party, who should take over the rule of the party in what is supposed to be a secular state, in which also under a system which tried to eliminate the tribal system in the South. But actually when the conflict started, the conflict turned from a political one into a tribal one. People from Abdala and Radfan were targeting those from Abiyan. The Hadramis were lucky not to be involved in that conflict because they did not get themselves involved in the conflict. I think the basic difference between the North and the South is as a result of the type of rule that existed before unification. In the South, people were completely dependent on government. They had their salaries from the government. The government will dictate everything for them. The ration of the food, they are subsidized, and therefore they were content because they could get, life is easy. They just get their salaries and the government provides everything. And the North system was different. People are employed by the government, they get their salaries. Their salaries were not enough, but they were free to self-employ themselves in the afternoons and the evenings. And some of them will work as taxi drivers, some will have little shops, and therefore the impact of any economic reform of them is much less because they can rely on this additional income. And this is why when we, in 2004, and 5, sorry, when we took the first steps for the economic reforms based on really a lot of pressure from the World Bank and the IMF in order to improve the economic situation, part of it was also retiring people who reach the retirement age. And this is again another difference between the North and the South, because under the British rule in the South, at least in Aden and Hadramaut, people has birth registry, and therefore you can exactly know when you retire them. In the North, there were no birth registries, and therefore they are almost unretirable. Okay, so when these reforms were implemented, and people in the South were hit hard by them, because now with the reforms they only have their salaries. They cannot have additional income as in the North, so they suffered, led to a resentment in the South. Retirement was another factor. It was not as, unfortunately, some of the separatist group in the South claimed that this is targeting the southern citizens. It wasn't. It was just a policy which, unfortunately, because policymakers did not take into consideration its impact, led to the suffering of many people in the South. And this is why the retirement was abandoned. We had to abandon a lot of the reforms at an enormous cost to the country. Actually, it has delayed the impact and the results of the economic reforms that we were hoped for. And this is now the process that we are trying to hopefully correct. There are administrative aspects as well, because as you said, in Aden in particular, because sometimes people, when they talk about the South, they try to generalize. But there were two areas in the South that were unique. That is Aden colony and part of Hadramaut also. Okay, where there was a better system of government, a better system of administration. Okay. And this, unfortunately, because people were used on this type of administration after unification, it has suffered as a result of unification, and therefore had a negative impact on the people. Now, is this the result of the unification? No, it's not. And as much as the behavior of some Muslims is not a reflection of Islam, I think it is a reflection of the behavior of the rulers, of the government, of the policy makers. They make mistakes, they have to correct these mistakes, and this is what's being done now. In response to your question about the diaspora, Yemeni diaspora, there are two types of Yemenis abroad. The majority of Yemeni abroad are unskilled workers. Okay. And this is one of the issues that we are now taking with the GCC countries, because we want to increase the number of Yemeni laborers who go to GCC countries. They say our market is different, we need to have a trained labor force. And we are now with them, with the help of them, building a lot of technical institutes in order to train Yemenis to go and work in Saudi Arabia. But these are the majority. And their importance to us is the transmittances they make to Yemen, because they've had a tremendous impact in the 70s on development in the north. Now things are a little difficult and more different now probably. There is a small minority, and these are the university professors, doctors, professionals here in America and Britain. Their number is small. And for the first time, I think in last year, they were invited amongst the migrants who came to Yemen to discuss the issue of the Yemenis communities in various parts of the world. And I think they have two important roles to play. One is within their communities and the countries they live in. Because unfortunately in many countries, in the United States for example, in Britain, Yemenis have not integrated within the people in the countries they live in. And I think this is a negative really behavior. And therefore I think those intellectuals or educated people must do much more really to encourage Yemenis to be fully participant in their communities, to take part in the elections, to have their voice in their communities, because this is one way of changing policies in their countries, and we've seen it in Britain. Okay. The second, of course, is how they can establish link with educational institutes, universities, research centers in Yemen, because this is where bilateral benefit can accrue as a result of this cooperation.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Rohan Gunaratna, I'm a professor of security studies. Minister, thank you very much for the honest and open assessment of the situation in Yemen. Last week, I returned after a week in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and the assessment of the US military is that as Al-Qaeda is getting squeezed on both sides, some of the key leaders, key operatives have relocated to Yemen. I also understand that the center of gravity of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which was largely Saudi-based, has now shifted to Yemen. You have inherited a lot of your problems. Do you have sufficient resources? Are you confident that you will have sufficient resources and expertise from US, European and other countries to fight emerging threat that Yemen is likely to face with these two developments? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have enough resources? To tell you the truth, no. This is why we are calling on world community in our alliance to fight terrorism in all its forms, not only Al-Qaeda, really, because there are many forms of terrorism, and I think more important than that, there is tremendous amount of radicalization in the world, not amongst Muslims, amongst other religions as well. And this is the challenge I think we all face. We have to talk about radicalization because this is really the path to terrorism. And there is unfortunately going a lot of radicalization in many communities, in Europe, in America, and our part of the world. The second point I think is, as I said in my introductory remarks, that terrorism fighting terrorism is an expensive business, because it is not just building your security and your intelligence, but also rebuilding your educational system, rethinking about the preachers in mosques, in churches, and in synagogues, educating your communities to be tolerant, to have the right media to undertake that, to have a better control of now what goes on in the internet in the process of radicalization, because this is unfortunately now a very important element that is very difficult really to deal with without a very concerted effort. This is why in Yemen, with our very limited resources, you see, when we target Al-Qaeda in some remote parts of the country, we cannot really be present immediately after the attacks, because of the distance, because of lack of transportation, because of the communication. So there are a lot of needs that have to be addressed. And this is what the terrorists take advantage of. They see where is the weakest point and they try to attack that weak point. But as far as the movement of Al-Qaeda and the Arabian Peninsula, it is not new. I mean, Al-Qaeda always moves between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. We have about 1,500 kilometers unpatrolled, unfortunately. When we squeeze them in Yemen, they will move to Saudi Arabia. When they squeeze them in Saudi Arabia, they will try to come down to Yemen. So it's a battle.
My name is Anthony Kyo. I'm on the board of I like your point number 5, and that is Yemenis must rely on themselves. And in one of the earlier speeches, we had a speech from our friends from Iraq, I think Minister Alawi, and I commented to him that the problems in Iraq is not as severe as some of the problems in Lebanon. And Lebanon is quite fractious. And yet Lebanon has, in benefit, a diaspora abroad. You too have a diaspora abroad. But you say that some of the diaspora is not as wealthy. But if you look at the diaspora here, Hadramaut here have had a long and illustrious history. Okay. Well, what I want to get from you is, what is the sense of will? Because you say resources are short. Resources are short in many countries. But what is your sense of will? Having been in education since for the last 15 years, maybe you have a better feel for that for us.
You just reminded me of part of his question about investments by the diaspora. You see, in the GCC countries, when there were political difficulties between Yemen and the GCC countries, the Yemenis, some of them are extremely wealthy, of course, in Saudi Arabia, could not come and invest in Yemen because they are worried in case their investment in Yemen will create problems for them in the countries they live in. Okay, but since things improved, there has been now. We have about over $1 billion investments from Yemenis in Saudi Arabia.
Yes,
okay.
I used to deal with the National Commercial Bank of Saudi Arabia,
yes,
which is partly owned by
yes. So they are now becoming more courageous, and they have the green light actually from the Saudi government in the GCC countries, which they did not get before. So I think things are improving in that regard. But I think what is creating a problem for us really in Yemen, and we've been trying to sort it out over the years, is that many of those who come to Yemen to invest in Yemen, they expect that the situation will be ideal. And then they find that it is not, because our laws were rather unwelcoming, procedures are very complicated, time-consuming. They can go into a country where they can, like Dubai, in 24 hours get their permit and they can start working the second day. In Yemen, it used to be 90 days. We have managed now to reduce it down to about 24 days. I hope we will continue to do that. And people are now do not lack really places for investment. I mean, if they come to Yemen and they find difficulty, they can easily go to somewhere else and invest. So this is our challenge now, is really how, when an investor comes, we show him that we are welcoming, that we are going to facilitate, we are going to speed up the process, we are going to cut the red tape, that there is also the legal system is extremely important, and that's why part of our reforms is really the judiciary. So these are really the difficulties faced. Yes.
Good afternoon. I'm Saladin bin Talib. I'm sure we have met the minister many times before. I'm from Yemen. I was a member of parliament 1997 to 2003. The last job I held in Yemen was a member of the Anti-Corruption Commission. Excellency, you've told an excellent story of how Yemen has gone from 1990 until today, which is about 20 years. In a few days we celebrate 20 years of unification. Such a good storyteller, but I always felt that the description of the ills of Yemen, there is a missing or an unseen elephant in the room, which has not been mentioned. And that is, well, it is the government's responsibility to solve the ills of the country and actually face the problems that it faces. And we cannot just continue to say that the problems just occur. The governments are there to prevent problems and also to counteract problems or to face problems when they happen. Now, let me try and tell you about the elephant. I think it has to do with the form of government and the governance. Basically, I'm talking about the patrimony in Yemen, the nepotism and corruption. Excellency, these questions have been put on the table over many years. But continuously, every time, every 5 years, we come to face, we know. That's why I think at the beginning of this talk, Excellency said, let's not delve too much into analysis. Because the analysis brings us to that same question. It is about governance. And you will have very little investment if that governance doesn't happen. You will have very little confidence of the investor and of the public and of the people that you will resolve your problems. Al-Qaeda, yes. We cannot now go raising the flag that we have Al-Qaeda in Yemen and we need help. Al-Qaeda flourishes in bad governance and in poverty. Exactly what has happened in Afghanistan, exactly what's happened in Somalia, exactly what happens in Pakistan. What have we done? We were an oil nation. Now we are depleting our oil. Our oil is finished, our gas has been sold, and there is no power in Yemen. So investors have a serious difficulty. Sir, I have been inside that machinery, and I have seen much of this lack of governance and bad governance that only the ill, those who are interested in self-enrichment are given positions in government, and not those interested in actually resolving the problems of the government. I have seen this, and I have resigned my post in the Anti-Corruption Commission because of the very first question that was put: is there a will to actually combat corruption? And I have serious difficulty to believe that. Very serious ones. Nepotism is flourishing a lot. And I, as have invested my time, my life, my energy in trying to do something in Parliament, trying to do something in anti-corruption, I must submit my confirmation that I have failed to even begin to understand why are things happening like that. So, sir, the question is simple. Is there a will to correct these serious problems? Thank you very much.
I will say there is a will, yes. But there are difficulties as well. It is not sometimes the will that will determine the end result, but also the influences. And you know, our Yemen democracy, our Yemen political system, our Yemen tribal system are influences that you cannot change overnight. Okay, I know people like you probably get frustrated and pessimistic. Okay, and decide that the best way that the best way is to leave, okay, and abandon the ship. But others prefer to persevere and hope that they will be able to change and make things better. But I can assure you that corruption, and you were a member of this committee, there has been a real progress. I mean, of course, we cannot eliminate corruption. Which country doesn't have corruption? But I can assure you that there is progress as far as corruption is concerned. The tendering process now is much improved. Okay, and I will invite you to come. Okay, I will invite you to come because it's always, I think, our expectations sometimes overwhelm us. But as far as people now, corruption we never talked about before. Now we have a committee to combat terrorism, corruption. People have been taken to court, hundreds of them been taken to court for corruption. Okay, maybe the courts are not functioning well. This is another challenge, I agree with you. And the sentencing and the implementation of sentencing, but at least we are moving forward. We are not stagnating. Okay, well, this is your point of view, and this is my point of view. But as I said, I would like you to come and review the situation, and not just read, because if you read, as I do sometimes, some of the websites that write about Yemen, and I've said this in some of the meetings in Europe and America, is that now there are so many experts about Yemen that one feels that even you as a man responsible for policy making, probably you don't know anything about Yemen politics, because there are so many experts talking about Yemen. But I can assure you that there are efforts, we are moving forward, not as fast as we would like to, a lot of frustrations. But
Sir, I'm not frustrated. Sir, I have laid down my guns and left because I have seen no use.
I think leaving is a sign of frustration.
Thank you, Minister. Yes, please, Mr. Bell.
Maybe I can just talk from here. Excellency, my name is Jay Sudas. I run a small consultancy in Singapore. If I could take you away a little bit from the problems in Yemen itself and ask you to look at the neighborhood, could I invite your comments and views on the situation in Somalia? No doubt it's a country outside Yemen, but probably the situation there continues and will continue to have an impact on Yemen itself. Is there any hope for Somalia? Is there a way out of the current situation? Is there any glimmer at all at the end of the tunnel? Thank you.
Somalia is very important to us in Yemen. As I told you, we have about 800,000 Somali refugees. The dangers of piracy. And our fishermen have been really hit hard both by the pirates and by the presence of the naval ships, because sometimes they will target poor fishermen, considering them as pirates. This has affected the fishermen, our fishing industry, and therefore we are very much interested to see normalization in Somalia. Why are we not achieving that? Partly, of course, the Somalis have their own differences. But partly because I think there is lack of international will to resolve the conflict in Somalia. There are hidden agendas that prevent we as Yemen are in three groups. In the contact group by the United Nations Security Council, we are in the Arab League Committee on Somalia, we are in the OIC Committee on Somalia. And we hold meetings for each of these committees 2 or 3 times a year. And we've been doing that for almost now 5 years. And nothing has happened. A lot of promises, nobody adheres to what's agreed upon from the donors, from those who are trying to help Somalia, except to be fair for Italy. Italy is providing at least the salaries for the policemen and the military that have been trained in Djibouti and in Uganda. If you recall, after the first interim government by Abdullah Yusuf, Yemen insisted that he should be given full support in order really to establish the government authority. And we thought the only way he can do it is to build his police force and military in order. And at that time, actually, the Shabab were a very small group, could be easily handled without any problems. And at that time, we sent him some equipment, machine guns and clothes for about 3,000 soldiers. And we had an outcry from the United Nations because we broke really the sanctions on the weapons embargo to Somalia. So we stopped, and everybody stopped. And Abdullah Yusuf is clear now. Now we have Sheikh Sharif, who was an Islamist who could really deal with the other groups. He is flexible, he is ready to accommodate all the others, yet he is left alone. And this is going to lead to disaster, if not war, in the Horn of Africa. And this is why we continuously, in our meetings in these various committees, insisting that really the issue of piracy, the issue of Al-Qaeda, should not be in the forefront of our solutions for Somalia. Because if we strengthen the Somali government, provide it with the means to control its coastline, to its territory, they will be able to overcome Al-Qaeda and any other groups.
Your Excellency, in your presentation, you started by, my name is Muhammad Talib. I am a cousin of Said.
Oh, Said. But by the way, Said has gained weight in Singapore.
Lack of frustration.
I wanted to hear Hikmah Yemeniya. We said Hikmah Yemeniya, wisdom comes from Yemen. The subject, the title of this talk today is Yemen in Changing Middle East. Yemen in a changing Middle East, yeah. I was hoping that you will back on this subject in the real sense of the word, but we are far away from the main topic. But my reason of saying this is because the trouble with the Middle East, with the exception of, when I say Middle East, I mean they are referring to Arab countries. I take out of context Turkey, Iran, and Israel. They are not Arab countries. The Middle East is not progressing. The Middle East is going backward. We have to admit this. We are down the slippery slope because of despotism and many other problems. You mentioned in your presentation, can Yemen come out of its difficulties? And you positively said, yes. I did not hear, I did not have any indication of how will we come out of the difficulties. That's one thing. I heard the two culprits, piracy and terrorism, often quoted by many countries who fail in the economic policies. So you continue to talk about hopes and fears facing Yemen. What is your greatest fear facing Yemen, and what is your greatest hope for Yemen? Can I hear from you, please?
I think response to your first part of the question about the Middle East, and it has an impact on the situation in Yemen, yes, in a way. Because if the Arab world or the Arab leaders in the Arab world had the vision as far as the future of the Arab countries, probably neither Somalia nor Yemen nor Sudan will be in the position, and others in the position they are in. because the Arab world are not without resources, and they are not without capable people. But it is the lack of the vision and the lack of a strategy to deal with the challenges. That's why we remain behind, and this is why we are disunited, and this is why economies in many parts of the world thrive on our own income, on the Arab world's income. And this is, I'm sure, is something that is written about on daily basis in the Arab media by Arab thinkers, Arab politicians, journalists, and so on. There is tremendous degree of frustration worldwide in the Arab region. And is this going to really produce change? This is the challenge, I think, that we as Arabs in our region are facing as citizens, and in trying to forge a new relationship between the ruler and the ruled. And this is what we hope to strive for. You see it in Syria, in Cairo, in Sana'a, in Sudan, everywhere. So let us hope that now what we see as, or consider as, a turmoil in the Middle East will lead us really to a change that will improve the status of our countries and make the Arabs a nation based on their history, not only on their wealth, a nation that can contribute to world development and civilization.
You don't see nepotism being the main culprit?
Sorry?
You don't see nepotism in the governments being the main culprit?
Yes, of course there is nepotism. Of course there is nepotism. And there is corruption in the Arab world. And nobody denies that. I think the problem is that now there is livelihood in amongst the Arab people in addressing these issues, and they will produce change. I think what, unfortunately, in my point of view, and I may be wrong, is that after the 11th of September, change in the Arab world was trying to be imposed from outside rather than from inside. And this, unfortunately, had a negative result rather than a positive result. And it has been aborted when the change appeared to go in the wrong direction to those who wanted to impose it. Okay. And this sort of thing has really slowed progress in our region. And we see now a new type of alliances in the region between the progressives and the reactionary, between those who want.
But the anger is simmering in the internet, in the Facebook.
Well, yes, and this is good, and this is good. But let me tell you that the simmering, what is going on in the internet, unfortunately, some of it is not correct. It's baseless, because it tries to target the emotions and not the minds of the Arabs. It tries to create or initiate a reaction, a negative reaction rather than a positive reaction. It tries to talk about sectorial differences rather fight against sectorial differences.
I think the youth are asking more for corrections, injustices.
Sorry?
The youth of the Arab world, the Yemen and Saudi Arabia, especially the internet,
well,
they want the answers to their questions.
I know they want answers, but I'm saying that those who answer them sometimes are not providing the right answers. Because I'm sure when you read these articles and you then read what the comments under these articles, you will see the divergence of points of view. And this is maybe positive, but I think for young people this is what sometimes can lead to radicalization, because people do not perceive the other point of view as being right or wrong, but whether they like it or they don't like it. Okay. So going back to your question, I think in Yemen, I think the challenge that what we hope for now is really challenge of governance. Okay, and the fear about Yemen is if really we magnify the religious differences and sectorial differences in the country.
What about the water crisis? What about the water crisis?
Water. Well,
What about
this is all part of the governance. Why are we not having enough electricity? Why are governance? The answer is governance.
Exactly.
Yes.
Thank you.
And
Mary?
what's your greatest hope?
Huh?
What is your greatest hope? Because you're so...
My greatest hope, I'm always an optimist. In Arabic we say ما أضيق العيش لولا فسحة الأمل.
Mary, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Stoniker with the Middle East Institute. I was just wondering if I could get your views on a rather new Singaporean economic international initiative or framework, if you will, the Global Governance Group, the 3G, as it's being called, of non-G20 members being able to have a voice within the international economy and improve economic integration of countries that usually don't get that representation. I was wondering your views on Yemen's, if Yemen can benefit from this, and the Global Governance Group. It's something actually that a Singaporean foreign minister proposed in the UN to give a voice to those that are not truly represented by the G20, even though that's not quite in the UN.
Sometimes I'm a pessimist. You see, I lived through two initiatives. One is health for all, and then education for all. And if you look worldwide now, in the developing countries, actually the situation is worse, both in health and in education. And therefore, many of these initiatives, unfortunately, start with a momentum, and then they die out. But let us hope that optimism exceeds pessimism.
Thank you very much, Minister. We have really kept the Minister for a long while. He has had a long day. Please join me in thanking the Minister. As Professor Rohan said, he has been very forthright, very honest, very transparent, and we thank you very much for this. And I thank you also to members of the audience, Mr. Talib, who were very challenging. Thank you very much. Will you please join me in